Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. We are just connecting all of our streaming feeds, and we will get started in just a few moments. Thank you for joining us. And we are all connected. So take it away, Heidi.
Thank you, Sophia. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for this special event. This is our annual Book Lovers Breakfast. This event every year for the Pratt kicks off library programming for Black History Month. Of course, at the Pratt, we like to call out and celebrate Black history in February, but we also believe it's critical to include it in our programming throughout the year. So I want to thank you all for your flexibility with the event this year. We've had to move to a virtual platform once again due to the Omicron variant and citywide health and safety restrictions. I know we had all hoped to gather together once again to share some food, some laughs, and our mutual love of books. I personally can't wait to be able to shout out our book clubs and hear all of those cheers again. And I'm very sad that we're not able to do it this year, but grateful that we found a way to move the event online. I'm very hopeful that we'll be able to be in person, having breakfast, breaking bread next year. This month, we have a really amazing lineup of Black History Month programming for you to attend virtually. On February 15th, we will host a virtual African American read-in at 6:30 p.m. It's a worldwide event that's reached more than 6 million participants. Then, on Wednesday, February 23rd at 7 p.m., we'll welcome award-winning food and nutrition journalist Tony Tipton Martin for a virtual event. There's just about 24 programs being held this month to celebrate Black history. And I want you to check out your copy of the Compass, or you can log on to prattlibrary.org to see all of them and hopefully come to many of them. Now, for this morning's event, I want to thank our longtime sponsor, The Afro, for their support of Book Lovers Breakfast. I also want to thank our partners at Mahogany Books. They've been our partner for this event for quite a while, and we really appreciate and support them. Mornings like this would also not be possible without the support of the Pratt Library Board of Trustees and Directors, and of course, our donors. I want to give a big shout out also to the Pratt staff, who have been incredibly agile and made this program happen. So thank you to the staff in the Programming and Outreach Department, including our Deputy Director of Public Services, Darcel Graham, our very own Sophia Nawale, who helped organize this morning, Caitlin Andrews, Sally Loesch, Angela Matthews, Felix Davila, and John Cardellini. So thank you all for being here and helping. Book Lovers Breakfast is a Pratt tradition that we don't want to lose. The late Congressman John Lewis, journalist April Ryan, and author Terry McMillan are just a few of the names that have graced the Pratt stage for this event. And today, we continue that tradition of excellence. Imbolo Mbue is a New York Times bestselling author. Her book, Behold the Dreamers, won the PEN Faulkner Award for Fiction and was in Oprah's Book Club selection. Her new novel, How Beautiful We Were, is a labor of love that she has been writing for 17 years. The book was named one of the top 10 books of 2021 by the New York Times. Imbolo Mbuye's books are some of the most checked out books at the Pratt Library. And so hopefully you will go check this book out if you haven't already, or purchase it from Mahogany Books, but I'm sure you've all read it already. Today, she is in conversation with the Pratt Library's own Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, M'Balu Bangura. So it's my pleasure to introduce Imbolo Mbue and M'Balu Bangura. Welcome to the Pratt stage.
Hi, thank you, Heidi, for that introduction. Imbolo, I'm very honored to be sitting across from you. As a West African Sierra Leonean myself, I jumped at the opportunity when they asked if I would like to have this conversation with you today. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lou. Thank you, Heidi, and thank you to everybody. I was so looking forward to coming to Baltimore when I found out, and then I found out that it wasn't going to happen. I was a little bit sad, but I am still happy. Like Heidi said, I am grateful that we can at least get to meet somehow over digital platform. But I do miss your faces. I wish I could see everybody's faces right now.
And Bo, how, as Heidi mentioned, you've had incredible success from your first book and now on your second book. How is that? Like, how does you've had photo shoots with Oprah? I can't even imagine. Are you used to this being known and having people know your name and asking to hear you speak?
Well, people know my books, not so much my name. I mean, Imbolo Mbue is not exactly the easiest name. It's funny because at one time I was at a party and somebody was going on and on about this book, Behold the Dreamers. And she said, oh, I got this book, Behold the Dreamers. And I said, oh, I got that book. And she goes, you? She knew the book, but who is the person who got the book doesn't matter, which is one of the things about being a writer, is that sometimes people can know your book, but they don't remember your name. But it is all a privilege. It is such a privilege. I am an immigrant. I'm not from America. I came here to go to college, and I stayed and I read Toni Morrison, and I was inspired to start writing, and I never imagined that I would go to Oprah's house and have a photo shoot with her as part of it. But it's all been a privilege, and I am very, very, very humbled every time I am invited to speak about my work.
So can you speak on your journey from Cameroon to America? I know that actually when I looked at your background, I saw that you went to Rutgers. I'm actually from Jersey. I grew up in Franklin. I don't know if you've heard of Franklin, but it's literally down the street from Rutgers. Right. That's why I didn't go to Rutgers, because I grew up down the street from Rutgers. And I also went to St. John. I did go to St. John's University, and you went to Columbia. So I found it interesting that we have those parallels.
Yeah.
So how was that transition from you coming from America to Africa? Because we know that in Africa the ideas are different. They see what they hear on music and what they see on TV. And so how was that for you coming here and seeing the reality of the American dream?
Right. Yeah. So I grew up in Cameroon, in the town by the ocean. It's called Limbe, which is where the characters in my first novel are from. And I think I had the idea that America was this wonderful, perfect place, because that is the image that I was fed on television for the most part. I didn't have a very sophisticated idea of America. And when I came here, I was amazed in some ways because I had grown up in a dictatorship. Cameroon has had the same president for almost 40 years now. And so I had never really understood what democracy felt like until I came to America. And I really appreciated the freedoms that this country had. But in many ways, I also was not aware of things like racism, and this is hardly uncommon for people who grew up in countries that are predominantly Black, but you just don't really go about thinking that you're a Black person when you live in Africa or the Caribbean and other places. You don't really think about that. And so coming to America and learning about racism was difficult for me. And it was also difficult to realize that there was a lot of poverty in this country, a kind of poverty that I hadn't been used to in Cameroon. And I personally had to go through that. I had to struggle financially as an immigrant in a strange country. My parents are not in this country, so I had to push myself through. I had help, thankfully, but for the most part, I had to push myself through life here. And all of that made me question whether or not it was a good idea to come here in the first place and to stay here. So my first novel, while it's not about my life, it was sort of inspired by my experiences of being an immigrant, coming here, working really hard, going to school and really believing in the promise of America, and still feeling as if it was just, everything was just stacked a little too high for me. And I did come very close to going back home. There were times when it was just really hard, and I thought maybe I should just go back to my country. But I'm glad I stayed. I didn't intend to become a writer, at least not at this level. But writing opened for me many doors, and he gave me the ability to write about my experiences also as an African and also as an American, because now I am an American as well.
And what sparked your interest into writing? Like you said, you didn't intend to be a writer, at least at this level. So what made you just start putting pen to paper or typing and getting your thoughts out there?
Well, I read Toni Morrison's Song of Solomon. That is the whole story. I was living in Falls Church, Virginia, which is not very far from Baltimore. And I went to the public library in Virginia one day, and I borrowed Song of Solomon. And I was very inspired by this book, which to me was just very singular. And so after I finished reading that book, I started writing. And at that point, I didn't have plans to become a writer. I just was writing as a hobby. My plan was, first I wanted to be a lawyer. So I tried to get into law school, and then that didn't quite work out. Then I got into graduate school. So this all happened after college. So I got into graduate school, and that is how I ended up at Columbia. I went to Columbia to get my master's in education. And my plan was to become a college professor. So after I got my master's at Columbia, I got into a PhD program. And I thought, I am going to get a PhD and be a college professor, but I'm still going to write on the side because I love to write. But after I got into that PhD, I didn't really feel like I wanted to do it just yet, because it was the financial crisis was going on back then. That was 2009. And I was concerned about quitting my job. I had a job at a media company while I was getting my master's, and I didn't want to quit my job. So I decided to turn down that PhD offer. And then a few months after I turned down the PhD offer, I lost my job. So it was in the middle of not having a PhD program to go to and not having a job that I thought that, why don't I try to make something more out of my writing? Because it seemed as if, the universe was closing all these doors to me. I wanted to get a PhD. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to, to have a corporate job, and every door was closed. So I like to joke that I only became a writer because nothing else worked out for me. But I mean, I did because I really, really wanted to work at a college. I just loved the college environment. And it's also, being a writer, and I imagine it's the same thing for you, coming from our cultures, an artistic pursuit is not exactly something that nobody sends a child to America to be, a musician or a writer or a sculptor. Nobody does that. We come here to become accountants and lawyers and pharmacists and doctors.
Nurses.
So I had never been encouraged along those lines that, oh, Imbolo, you can write, you can be a writer. Nobody ever said that to me. So it took a long while, and my first book did not come out till I was 35. I was married with children at 35 before my first book came out. So for me, it was a very long journey. And also because I had no education, no educational background as a writer. I had never taken a writing class. So I basically had to spend all these years learning how to write, which for me just was very involved, because writing is very intricate, right? There's a lot of very tiny, fine pieces that have to come together for a story to work. And so I had to spend many years teaching myself that. But it was all a very long journey, and it really pushed me to grow, not only as a writer, but as a person. Because in that journey of, and I didn't mention the part where when I thought, maybe I should try to get my work out there, everybody rejected my work.
Right.
So it wasn't as if I said, let me try to publish my work and then everything happened. No, I spent 3 years having my work rejected by pretty much every agent in the country who I tried to get to represent me. Because to be published by a major publisher like Random House, where I am, you need an agent to represent you, and agents are very picky. So I sent my work to everybody, and they said, we think you have talent, but we don't like your book. So I heard that over and over, and I kept on, because once I made up my mind that, okay, I'm not going to get a PhD, I'm not going to be a lawyer, I'm not going to go back to my corporate job. Once I decided I'm going to go down this path, that was it for me. I stuck to it. I was going to give up at some point, but I wasn't ready to give up after a few years. So I spent 3 years having my work rejected. And finally, I sent it to a woman who had rejected it. And I said, I'm not going to give up on me. I'm going to keep pushing. And I sent it to her. And she finally and decided to give me a chance. Her name is Susan Golom, and she's now my wonderful agent. So I finally got one agent who agreed to represent my work, and she sold it to Random House, and that is how it all happened.
So now that you have all this, you have amazing credentials behind you now. Do you ever think about going back and maybe teaching a few courses here and there? Because it sounded like you had a passion, you wanted to really do that at one point. Do you ever think about doing that now?
Well, I mean, I do get invited to speak at colleges now. So I guess in a way, I had that dream come true, because I didn't get a PhD, but as a writer, colleges study your books, and high schools, at least my case, I have high schools that study my book and colleges that study my book. So it's a privilege for me to go to college. I don't exactly teach, but at least I get to stand in front of students and talk, which is a dream come true.
Your first book was published in 2016, Behold the Dreamers. And that was during a time where there was, we'll say, a lot of conversation around immigration. Mm-hmm. How was that for you? Did that impact your want to release the book, or after the book was published, did that impact you at all?
Well, I had no say, because once it was sold, it was going to come out. So I couldn't stop it. But, I have to say that I was not really thinking that this book was about immigration when I was writing it. Okay. I was thinking very much that this was a book about the financial crisis, because this was a story that was set during the financial crisis, the Great Recession. And I thought it was about families, two families, one immigrant family, one American family, that was, and how the financial crisis affected them. So that was my mindset when I was writing it. And then the book came out in 2016, at a time when there was all this talk about immigration, because we had this election, and it was very much about immigrants and whether or not certain immigrants belong to the country. And once the book came out, every question I had to answer was, "Oh, so Imbolo, as an immigrant, how do you feel? As an immigrant, how do you feel?" And before then, and I don't know how to say this without coming out the wrong way, but before then, I didn't really have an immigrant identity as much as that book made me, ended up making me have, because I thought of myself more as an African. I thought of myself more as a Black person. I thought of myself more as a New Yorker than I did as an immigrant. Like, I wasn't like, oh, me immigrant. It wasn't at the front of my mind like that. So it was only after the book came out that I really had to start thinking and saying, oh, I am an immigrant, right? I have to think about how being an immigrant shapes my perspective, because I thought that my struggles in America, when I came here, when I barely had money to pay my bills, when I could barely afford to finish my education at Columbia because I didn't have enough money to finish paying my tuition, I thought that those issues were more about class than they were about immigration. So I was very concerned about class, because I had grown up in a very class-conscious society in Cameroon. I had grown up in a place where a lot of people's struggles had to do with the fact that they were poor. And then I came to America, and I saw that a lot of struggles that I went through and that other people I knew went through had to do with their socioeconomic condition, that, we were working class. So I saw life a lot more through the perspective of class than I did through my immigration status. Because if I was an immigrant, I had money, I don't think I would have struggled the way I did financially, right? It was more from a class perspective. That is not to say that I didn't struggle as an immigrant, because I did. I mean, I was in a strange country. I left, my family behind. I have this, exotic, funky accent that, people remind me that I have all the time. So I have many things that, people look at me and they say, you're not from here. And I had struggles with that. But when I came to this book, Behold the Dreamers, it was more about looking at the American dream. It was more about looking at the structure of this country, and how two very different segments of the society, a working class family and a rich family, how they both struggled because of this definition of the American dream that it had to do with material success. So do I capture the immigrant struggle in the book? Yes, I do. But I really did not think that this was going to be labeled as an immigrant narrative to the extent that it was. And I am happy about it. And I am very grateful because I get asked to talk a lot about immigration, because the fact is that people don't talk about the Great Recession as much anymore, right? People don't say, oh, Imbolo, talk about your experience during the financial crisis. Nobody really says that. They say, talk about your experience as an immigrant. But my perspective with that book was more shaped from a class perspective than it was from an immigrant perspective.
Okay. And that makes a lot of sense to me, because like, as you say, like in Africa, it is more about class and what you do for a living. You may never, someone who has a compound that has a driver and has a doorman may never know the name of their doorman.
That's right.
Or the name of their driver.
Right.
And so that makes a lot of sense. But it's different here because there's a lot of more like different issues surrounding discrimination.
Yes.
More than just class. And so
exactly.
Yeah, so
it's
people
more complicated here.
Different.
It's very, because like in the beginning of Behold the Dreamers, there's a scene where it's an African immigrant man goes on a job interview with this wealthy guy to be his chauffeur, right? Now, I never knew any chauffeurs in America, any private chauffeurs. But growing up in Cameroon, I knew private chauffeurs, because you don't need to be that have a certain kind of wealth to have a private chauffeur.
Or a doorman, yeah.
But that scene between that immigrant and that rich man, like a lot of people might say that is about race. This is a rich man and this is a black man. To me, that scene was more about class, and that scene could have taken place in Cameroon. That exactly like that, because it was a poor man and a rich man. And that is how I saw it for the most part, that this is about power. This is about power that you get from your class. And so it's one of those things that, because I didn't grow up in America, I tend to see things a little bit differently, right? So even though I am Black, I've had incidents where something happened and my friends would say, oh, that's because you're Black. But for me, I would have thought maybe because I came across as poor, right? Maybe because somebody said, oh, this is a poor person, they're probably unintelligent, maybe they have an accent because they didn't go to school because they're poor. And so that is, that I think of that possibility as well. And I just don't think that it has to do with race or my immigrant status. I think that there's because I grew up in a very class-conscious society, I tend to see class in America more so than some other people might.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with you transitioning from how you lived in Cameroon, and then you come to America, and you have lived in several different places in America. It seems like you love New York the most, though, out of all the places. It seems like New York seems to have captured your heart out of all the places that you live. What is it about New York that you love so much? Is that why you placed your first, other than you being in school in New York, but is that why your first book was in New York?
Yeah, well, it is my hometown now. It's my adopted hometown. I am not there right now because I am living a little bit out of the city in a rural area. But when I came to America, I was very homesick. I really, really was homesick. I really wished I could go back home. And I didn't really feel like I can stay in this country and really find my way here until I moved to New York City. Like New York City, the moment I moved there, I was no longer homesick. I just felt like I belong in this country. And maybe because New York is like its own little country in a way. So I felt like I'd moved to a different country, and I went there, and I went to graduate school there. I got inspired to be a writer there. I wrote characters who live in New York City. So the city to me just gave me this sense of belonging, which is something that we all search for, especially as immigrants. When you leave your country, you want to feel as if you belong somewhere. And the moment I moved to New York, I said, "This is where I belong." And even though I'm not there right now, I still think of it as my hometown. And I do plan on going back there in a couple of years, just not right now.
So with your love for New York, why is your second book in Africa and not in New York? What made you decide to switch continents completely for your second book?
Well, it's a very different book. It's a different sort of
Mhm.
book, but there is a character who comes to New York. So there is a character who lives this country, which is a fictional African country, and she comes to New York. But yeah, so that is it's a way New York follows me. Even though I wrote a book that is about characters in an African community who are fighting an American oil company. A lot of that was also inspired during my time living in New York, when I get to learn a lot about environmental justice, where I got to see up from people protesting injustice. And so even though it wasn't set in New York, it still was very inspired by events that had happened in New York or people that I had met in New York.
Mm-hmm. And the story is set in a fictional village in a country that's not named. Mm-hmm. My interpretation is that West African countries, unfortunately, have been plagued with decades-long war. Sierra Leone went through a 10-year-long war, and it's usually almost always over resources. Mm-hmm. Was that the inspiration behind you not giving it an actual location, making it fictional so that it could be inspiring or relatable to anyone from any West African country, or am I reading too into that?
No. I mean, and that is you thinking along the right lines, but it wasn't only about Africa.
Okay.
that story was, and people have a hard time understanding that because they think, oh, this is about a place in Africa. But a lot of those events were inspired by, a lot of that story was inspired by events that happen all over the world, because we have environmental crisis happening in every part of the world. It's not just in Africa. So for example, the story starts with children drinking poison water, and that was inspired by Flint, Michigan. So, I could have said the story in Flint, Michigan, but I didn't, because it wasn't so much about the physical location of this village. It was about what people can do when they decide that they have the power to fight back. So the Flint, Michigan was a big part of this story. I was inspired by, I don't know many people know what happened in Parkersburg, West Virginia, which is still happening, there was a lot of contamination there, and people got cancer and lots of other diseases because the DuPont company had this plant there that contaminated the water. So I was taught a lot about Parkersburg, West Virginia, and there's the issues of fighting against injustice. It was inspired a lot also by the civil rights movement. I taught a lot about Dr. King, of course, but also about Malcolm X, also about Angela Davis, also about Frederick Douglass. And a lot of these people, not just in America, but in other parts of the world, I use them as inspiration for the character of Tula, who is a young girl who grows up and leads the fight against this oil company. So why did I put it in Africa? Why didn't I put it in South America? Well, because I know Africa, right? I know. So it's my interest wasn't so much about one particular place. My interest was in exploring what happens when people's backs are against the wall, when whether it's a government or a corporation or any system of injustice. What happens when people say enough is enough, we can't take it? But what if these people don't have the powers, they don't have the tools, they don't have the resources to fight this powerful entity? What do they do? And so I started writing this story to look at that, to look at a social movement, but not a movement led by people who can hire lawyers, a movement led by people who love their ancestry, they love their land, they love their traditions, and they're fighting really hard to hold on to that. And they don't care that this powerful corporation can squash them. They are willing to give everything for the sake of justice and equality. So that is what was my interest, not so much about where the story was set.
Wow, that's amazing. Actually, you're right. I did not think at all that it could be based on different issues that happen across the world, especially even America. When you said Flint, that was like, oh, it makes sense. I never thought that I never thought to take it outside of Africa because it was placed in Africa.
Right. And I can understand that, because people say to me, oh, this is about Africa. And of course it's about Africa, because these things have happened in Africa. But I have also lived in America more than I have lived in Africa. So when I think about people, I think about people that I've met in America. When I think about issues, I mean, the issues that happen in that book, environmental injustice and corrupt governments and greedy corporations, those are all things that I saw in America. You know?
Right.
I just took them from America and put them in Africa, but I saw them in America. And so this book is very much about America. It's just a bit of a fable, because I didn't put it in America. Maybe if I did, people have said, oh, wow, people in America are drinking poison water, and sometimes the government doesn't fight enough for the people. Maybe people would have thought that. But I did not, again, it wasn't so much about the place. Obviously, the issues in the book that didn't happen in America, like colonialism. Even America has not been colonized to the extent to which this place has been colonized. But as a writer, I don't believe in limiting myself as far as inspiration is concerned. Events in this book were inspired by, I mean, the storylines in this book were inspired by events that are happening in Ecuador, events that are happening in Philippines, events that happen in Nigeria. So as a writer, all I had to do was look at all these different events and find the similarities, because these stories are very similar. I mean, the governments that don't protect their people, it happens all over the world. Corporations that only care about profits, happens all over the world. So I did not limit myself. I took it from Flint, I took it from Philippines and Ecuador and Nigeria, and I put it in one place in Africa.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was there any significance behind placing it in the 1980s?
Not significant, not typically, no. I mean, I grew up in the 1980s, so that's how old I am. So maybe I just wanted to do a bit of a throwback to, you know, the time when I myself was a child, like the children in the book.
Okay. And I noticed there's no real protagonist in the book, and it seems like with your last book and with your new book, you like to write in many different perspectives. How is that? Like putting yourself in different personalities and writing from those perspectives and those feelings, is that challenging at all?
No, because I think it would be much more challenging to just write from one perspective for me.
Oh, really?
Because it's funny. It's funny because now I never thought about that I was writing, you know, 2 different books and they have multiple perspectives. But now I'm thinking, oh my God, should my next book be just from one perspective? Should I try something simpler? But no, it's for the second book in particular, you know, I'm writing about the community, right? I'm writing about a group of people who come together to fight. And I could have just told everything from one perspective, but I decided to show the children what it's like to be a child growing up in this world, growing up in a world in which you don't think that enough is being done to protect you, and what becomes of you when you grow up and when you decide one day to fight against that. But I do think that the character of Tula, who grows up to lead this movement, I think that in my mind, she's the main character, because even though we only hear her voice in one chapter, she's what holds the whole story together. Right. She's the person who, she's one of the children who had been growing up in this village that whose water has been contaminated. She grows up, she sees her friends dying around her from this poison, and her little brother almost dies, her father loses his life, her uncle loses his life, all in the purpose of this movement, in an attempt to fight this oil company. And then she grows up one day and she says, I am going to do something. So she comes to America, she goes to New York City, and her eyes are opened and she's inspired by what she sees in America, and she goes back. So in a way, I think that she's the main character, but it wasn't just her story. It is a story about the community as a whole. It's a story, because if you think about social movements, I mean, we can, you know, think about, say, the civil rights movement. We can talk about, you know, Dr. King or John Lewis or Malcolm X, but this was about a whole community of people. It was about the entirety of Black people in America who were fighting against all this injustice. So while there's one person who can be the main character there, I wanted to tell the story of all the many different Black people who came together to get us to where we are today as Black people in America.
Oh, wow, that's inspiring. Was there any person in particular that inspired the character of Dua? Because she's a very strong, passionate person that's had an incredible journey. Is there any particular woman in history or in current times that inspired her, or is it a collective of different people?
Well, so I'll say that when I first imagined Tula, I was mostly inspired by men. So like because I thought, imagine like a female version of Nelson Mandela, a female version of Gandhi, but over time I started realizing that like that is because when I was growing up in the 80s, a lot of the leaders and revolutionaries and dissidents who were celebrated were men. So I hadn't really thought about a woman in that position. So originally that character was a man. And it was over time that I started thinking that, wait, there are women who are leading movements. There are women who are changing the world. So I mean, Angela Davis is an example. She was a big part of the civil rights movement. Right. Gloria Steinem, that's another woman I looked at. Daw Aung San Suu Kyi, who is not, doing very well these days, but I thought about her also. And obviously, I was writing this book in 2016, so Hillary Clinton was there, and there was, and I was also writing it at the time when the women's march was going on, and so I looked at those women as well, and part of what Tula has to deal with also is not just leading her people and fighting this powerful oil company, but she has to do it as a woman. So she has to do it as a single woman who has chosen not to get married or have children. So I also had to look at the struggles of that, of being a woman who is very singular, who, even though she's fighting for her people, some of them don't respect her because she's a woman. And so a lot of the women whose works I study, I was writing this book like up to 2019. So I even looked at somebody like AOC, for example, like just being a young woman as well in such a position. So even though I started out being inspired by these male revolutionaries, in the end, it was really the women, the female leaders of recent times who actually helped me really craft the character into what she became.
Did it set you back at all did you have to go back and change the character? Because you said originally that she was a he. Did that set you back at all in your writing?
Well, so so I should rephrase that. It was the main character who was leading the movement was a man. It was Tula's father. Tula was there as a girl, but Tula the girl was telling the story of what the men were doing, and it took me a lot of basically recognizing that I've been lied to by the world a lot about women's position. Okay. And so when the scales fell off my eyes, then I realized, wait, Tula is not telling the story about what the men are doing. She was one doing it. So once I realized that, then the whole story finally came together.
Is she your favorite character?
I love her, but I mean, she's one of my favorites. I mean, I do like the character of Konga, who is the madman in the village, who basically is the one who tells everybody, listen, guys, you don't have to sit here and take this stuff. You can fight this oil company, right? So I love that sort of craziness in a way. Somebody who is, is in the literal sense, he is mentally ill, but he also is so wild to believe that people can stand up and fight powerful corporation. So I also love that character.
Who would you say was your most challenging character to write?
Well, in my first book, it was the character of Cindy Edwards, because she was just a very difficult character for me. In my second book, it was Tula's mother. Her name is Sahel, only because her chapter in the book it's full of a lot. It's a lot of pain, a lot of joy, love, and sacrifice. She really captures what it's like to be a woman, and also a woman who is traditional, but also has to pay a price because she has a child who is very different from her. So that was difficult. But Tula was not. I mean, Tula, I just had so much inspirations for Tula that she wasn't a very difficult character for me.
Okay. Were there any scenes that were, without giving away too much of the book, were there any scenes that were particularly hard or it took you a long time to get through?
Yes, there were lots of them. Tula too many of them. Oh yeah, there's a scene which and it has to do with somebody looking back. Tula's grandmother is looking back in time, and it doesn't give away anything in the story. She's looking back in time about what their village has been through, and she's talking about the time way before the story started, when the slave traders used to come around to their area to get, to capture people, to sell them as slaves. And she was talking about, all the people who were captured, and sold as slaves. Like, what happened to their children? What happened to the descendants of those people who were sold as slaves? And that was a very difficult one for me to write, because I knew the answer to that. I knew what happened to the descendants of those people because I live around them now. But for some reason, I just had a very hard time writing that part.
Okay. Well, is there anything, can you tell us what's next for you, or is there anything you can share with us today?
What is next? Well, I'm going to write something very different next time. I mean, my first two books were different, so I imagine my next book is going to be as different. But I am enjoying this. This book, like Heidi said, it was a very long journey. I started writing it in 2002. It didn't come out in 2021, so it was a long journey. My next book, I think I'm going to write it in 5 days, hopefully, because after having spent like pretty much a lifetime in one book, I don't think I want to do that again.
Makes sense. I'm going to take some questions from our lovely viewers. Our first question, Kenny asked, I am an Ethiopian American woman living in the US. I started writing 3 years ago. I am now writing my first book based on similar topics like Ms. Mbuye's first book, Behold the Dreamers. I was curious if Ms. Mbue does any type of mentoring, teaching for new writers.
Well, I have a lot of writers who come to my events and they ask me for tips and advice. So yes, I gladly share it. I also speak at a lot of, not a lot, but I do speak at writing programs sometimes and writers' conferences. And I think that is one advice I'll give to aspiring writers, that you should take advantage of workshops and classes. I imagine even the libraries have sometimes give writing classes. That is a good way to meet other writers, because what I didn't have as a writer, I didn't have other writers around me. I didn't know any other writer in my life. So I basically just stayed in my little corner and spent all this time writing these books. And I didn't realize how terrible my writing was because there was somebody else to give me feedback. So if you could find a sort of community of writers, I think that would be very beneficial.
Okay. Next question. How do you see the relationship between the African immigrant community and the native-born African American community?
Oh, how do I see the relationship? Well, I think it could be better. I think that before I came here, I'll speak up for myself. Before I came here, because I didn't really understand African American history as well, I had a lot of misconceptions about what it was like to be African American in America, right? So I didn't, like, when we had African Americans come to my town, we didn't really think of them as, oh, they're from here, they're one of us. We thought of them like, oh, they're just white people from America. They just have black skin like us, but they're white people from America, because we just thought America was a country of white people. And so African Americans were another version of white people. It was only when I got it that I realized, no, that is not quite the case. I'm not sure what it is, but there's just a sort of, I don't know whether it's an inability to really connect, based on our shared ancestry, or whether it is for political reasons. But I have noticed that a lot of Africans tend to stick with Africans when they come to America. They don't think, oh, let me hang out with my African American brothers and sisters and understand their stories. We mostly stick with other Africans. And thankfully, I didn't have that experience. I went to college in New Jersey. I went to Rutgers, and some of my best friends were African Americans when I went to college. So that for me was a very big advantage, because it allowed me to understand a lot about African American history. And of course, I became a writer in part because it was an African American woman who inspired me to start writing. So in my life, I don't see that difference anymore, but I know that we still have a long ways to go in that relationship.
The next question is about work-life balance. They would like to know, what are your tricks to maintaining a writing life while also being a part of your family?
I well, I write a lot at night sometimes. Thankfully, because of the pandemic, I'm not traveling as much. In a way, it's good, but in some ways, it's sad because I do miss being in front of audiences. But as far as balance, I mean, it was hard in the city because in the city I lived in a very small place. Now I have a little bit more space, so I can have a bit more quiet. But to me, it's just all about having a really good structure, time-wise, managing my time in the sense that my family knows that this is her time to write. Please don't talk to her right now. Because what I do not like is distraction. Please do not distract me when I'm trying to write, because once I lose my flow, then it gets really hard to get back into it. So I don't know. Once I close that door, please do not knock on it, because I don't want any distraction right now.
Do you have any favorite character that you've written between both of your books? Are they characters that you would revisit, or a cameo? Would they make a cameo in future works?
No, there'll be no cameos. Do I have a favorite? I love the character of Gender in Behold the Dreamers. That was my very first character that I ever developed. He's an immigrant from Cameroon. He's from my town. He lived in Harlem. I lived in Harlem. And I understand his struggles. He's not exactly the most intelligent person. He makes poor decisions, but I think that his heart is in the right place. And even though his mistakes were hurtful to his wife, I do think that ultimately he had a lot of love and compassion. I also really like the character of Tula. Like I said, I think Tula, when I was growing up as a child, I just really admired strong women. I just always, even now, I still so admire strong women. Mm-hmm. Like whenever I meet a woman who I think is strong, I'm like, wow, I just want to worship you. So I am not like that. I am nothing like Tula. So writing Tula was I got to be like a fangirl, basically. I got to follow, basically it's it's following around like this rock star and getting to see them, how they eat, how they sleep, how they think. It was just this experience of being with some of the people that I admire the most in the world, who are people who stand up. And again, as somebody who learns a lot from other women and really admires women who are tough and courageous, I just, writing her was such a thrill and a privilege.
Mm-hmm. What was it like to win a PEN Award for Behold the Dreamers? Did you celebrate?
Yes, I did. It was a big privilege. That was in 2017. And the PEN Faulkner was a wonderful organization. So I remember the day they called me and they sent you for the PEN Faulkner Award, and I lost it. I was so happy. Did
you scream?
I did. I was like, no way. And they have this wonderful ceremony, the award ceremonies in Washington, D.C. And it was, I went there with family and friends, and it was a wonderful time. I'd say my first really big honor. Actually, no, it was the same week that I won a PEN Faulkner, the same week that Oprah called me. So that was a very big.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, actually, PEN Faulkner called me on a Monday and said, you want PEN Faulkner? And then Oprah called me on a Friday and she said she picked my book. So that was a memorable week.
Yes, I would be pinching myself like, is this real?
Yeah, well, I couldn't say the Oprah one for 2 months because you're not supposed to say when she calls you until she's ready to announce. But it was still like, oh my God, these two things happen in 1 week.
Right. What was your process in finding the title for your books? Was it immediate? Did you know what you were going to name your books before you wrote them, or did it come to you?
Oh no, it wasn't immediate. It was awful. It was awful. But both of them, I had a very hard time. Okay. Behold the Dreamers was the hardest because this was a story that was about so many things. We thought, should we go for a title that captures the race element, immigration element, class element? Is it about family? Is it about financial crisis? The book had so much going on that I came up with probably 20 or 30 titles, and my publisher rejected everyone. They said, we don't like this, we don't like that. So they kept on pushing me, can you have something better? And one day they said, okay, we have a deadline. We need to have a title for this book by 6 p.m. today. So I was freaking out because I was like, I need a title by 6 p.m. And then my husband said, what about the word behold? And I said, oh, behold. And then I said, the dreamers. And that was it. Behold, the dreamers. And that's how we came up with that. How Beautiful We Were was inspired by a verse in the Bible, in the book of Song of Solomon. There is a Song of Solomon, for people who don't know, is a series of love songs. And there is a verse that this man says to his beloved, how beautiful you are, my darling, oh, how beautiful. And I thought that is such a beautiful declaration of love, like how beautiful you are when you look at somebody that you love and you think that they're so beautiful. And so I thought this is the same way these people feel about their ancestral home. This is how they feel about their village, that it's a beautiful place, and they as a community are very beautiful people, and that is what they're fighting for, to hold on to this beauty. And so I changed that verse around and said how beautiful we were. So I had a very religious upbringing. I was raised in the church. I don't exactly go to the same kind of churches I was raised in.
Yeah.
but I was raised in the church, so I words like Behold and Song of Solomon, I grew up around that stuff. So a lot of the way I see the world and question the world was shaped by having been raised going to Bible studies and spending a lot of time in church.
I actually wondered that myself, because how beautiful we were. The story itself is kind of sad, but the title is not as sad. So that's good to know that that's where it came from.
Yeah. It's both of the books, the epigraphs are from the Bible. So Behold the Dreamer, the epigraph is from Deuteronomy. The Lord your God is taking you into a good land. And the epigraph from How Beautiful We Were is from Isaiah. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. So even though my books are not religious, but because I bring so much of myself, and my religious childhood is still a very big part of me, even if I don't subscribe to certain beliefs, somehow they find themselves into my books.
So what do you do when you're not writing? Are there any books that you're reading right now? Do you read when you're not writing?
Oh, I read all the time.
Okay.
I have too many books I'm reading at once. What am I reading now? I am reading a Frederick Douglass biography, because I can't get enough of Frederick Douglass. I am reading, I love memoirs also. I'm reading right now the memoir of Eric Adams, who is the new mayor of New York City. He's a vegan, and he wrote a memoir about becoming a vegan. And so I'm reading that. I am also, I just got this book also, which just goes, because when you're a writer, you have a lot of books sent to you to read. So I never lack books to read. So I just got this book to read. This is about a woman who left America as a Black woman because she just didn't really want to stay in America. So she went back to, I think, Trinidad and Tobago. So I was just sent the book to read. I think it's coming out next month. And then I'm reading a couple of novels as well. I read about 5 or 6 books at a time.
Is that
and also audiobooks. So I have audiobooks and ebooks and books in every room in my house. So yes, I am a book addict. What can I say?
Is that surreal for you, going from having a hard time getting anyone to read your book to having people send you their books to be read before they even get published?
Well, I mean, because I love books, I'm happy, but no, I don't read all of them, obviously. As a writer, you get sent a lot of books because sometimes publishers want you to, give a blurb, endorse a book, and I can't really do that unless I love a book. So the books, when I don't finish it. But there are also books, young writers who I like to support. So like this book I just showed you, I think that's a young writer. It's her first book. And so anyway, I can support the book, because to me it's very important that I support other writers, especially writers of color and writers whose voices are not heard as much.
Okay. And another question is, how has your perception of the American dream changed from when you first arrived to the US to now?
How has it changed? Well, so I have to say that I didn't exactly buy into the American dream the way some people do. As in, I didn't think that the American dream was about achieving material comfort. So when I came to America, I didn't have this dream of having a big house, having 2-car garage, and all those things. I basically wanted to find a way to be true to myself, to to use an Oprah language, to live my highest truth. That was more important to me. And I think that has become my American dream more than anything else. That I more and more I become true and true to myself. I figure out who I really am and become that. That to me is one of the biggest gifts America has given me. Even more than being a writer, even more than the space to go on, talk, and give my opinions. It is more the ability to discover myself and to be myself, because I don't think that there's any substitute for that.
Okay. And our last question: what is the biggest lesson that you've learned as a writer?
I think it's important that you tell the story that you really, really have to tell. Both of my books, that's what I did. I told the story that I have to tell. Because in this day and age, there's so much going on, and sometimes people think, oh, what book should I write that people are going to like, or that can sell, or that can get me published? But because I started off not thinking about being published, when I started writing, it was a hobby, and I was just writing because I enjoyed writing. I was able to write the story that I wanted to write. So Behold the Dreamers was the story that I wanted to write. How Beautiful We Were was the story I wanted to write. It wasn't based on whether or not publishers were going to like it, whether or not it was going to be a bestseller, whether or not I was going to be invited to speak in Baltimore. None of that mattered to me. It was more tell the story that you have to tell, and and everything else is going to go from there.
Okay. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think we have any questions. And I'm pretty sure that concludes our conversation today. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn this over to Sophia. I want to say thank you again. I really am honored to have spoken to you today. This was such a great conversation, and it was really great meeting you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lou. Thank you, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning. Thank you, Lou, and thank you, Imbolo, for giving us your time this morning, talking about all your works, what might happen in the future for any future works, and just sort of like your thoughts about, everything in between, writing, personal life, all that stuff. I want to thank our wonderful audience for joining us this morning as well. And I also want to thank our hearing and speech agency, ASL interpreter, Alyssa. If you haven't already, please purchase your copies of Imbolo's book. We have put links in the comments below. And with that, I'm going to close us for this morning. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, take care, and have a good rest of your weekend.
Bye.